Peace and welcome to the culture right here on the Black Star Network. Folks, we got a lot of big conversations, and we're continuing the conversation around the tragedy in Uvalde, Texas. We're talking about gun control, battling the gun lobby. We know the president has called out the industry for its influence and impact on laws and restrictions. However, the question becomes, will we see some real progress? Now, this is also coming in the midst of the NRA is having its national convention this week in Houston, Texas. And we're going to break it down with Mr. Politics, Hassan Giordano, to talk about the implications of that convention right now. We'll have that conversation at the 4 o'clock hour, folks. Let's talk about George Floyd 2 years later. Is momentum for police reform fading? We'll have that conversation. And then later, Colin Kaepernick. Wow, he gets a workout with the Las Vegas Raiders. Whoa, 5 years later, it looks like the MVP quarterback is finally getting a big shot this week. And the question becomes, should we expect a comeback like never before in the NFL? So we'll have those conversations and more. So stay with us. It's all happening on today's edition of The Culture right here on the Black Star Network. Let's go. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in today to The Culture here on the Black Star Network. We have some big discussions as we continue our conversation and coverage around what happened in Uvalde, Texas just a few days ago, where 19 children were shot and killed in a classroom, and 2 adults along with those children killed by a gunman, Salvador Ramos, an 18-year-old who was said he was bullied, and as a result of the bullying, decided to take out his anger on Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. Now, certainly this massacre and this tragedy, considered to be one of Texas's most violent massacres, but it also is causing a lot of conversation around the big idea of access to guns, because one of the things that the gunman was able to do when he became 18 years old, he was able to purchase a high-powered rifle right there in the state of Texas at the young, tender age of 18 years old. And so now people are calling for reform, even going so far as having President Biden to just excoriate the gun industry because of their lack of action. And many people are looking at the GOP as being the culprit for continuing to allow the gun lobby to wield so much power and influence. And I want to check in now with Hassan Giordano, who is the owner of DMV Daily Media, to give us his insight analysis about this larger conversation of what it will take to get the gun control situation, guns under control here in this country, and how do you go about battling the all-important, all-powerful lobby of guns. Hassan, thank you so much, dear brother, for checking in as always. How are you this afternoon?
Complaint. It's always a pleasure, sir.
Absolutely. Hassan, there are so many big different conversations that are happening right now because of what we saw in Texas, the great tragedy. And I have to admit, bro, my heart is still aching as I'm reading more and more and learning more and more about this situation. It's mind-blowing that something like this of this magnitude has happened, and has happened not at the hands of an adult, but another young person. And one of the conversations that I know that we've had here on the show is that when we're talking about these active shooter situations, when we're talking about these gun folks that are going into schools, going into public spaces, and committing these type of atrocities, these are young people who have access to guns. Now, what do we make of where we are with gun control in this country, especially since President Biden has come out to say that something has to be done.
Well, I think something does need to be done, but I think it's a little disingenuous when Democrats continue to use tragedies like this to call for that gun control, right? And they only use that as momentum that never goes anywhere, right? You have 100 United States senators who, for the most part, work year round, and yet no legislation seems to get done around this issue, from Sandy Hook to Texas. I mean, why do we have to go from tragedy to tragedy in order for the United States Congress to begin talking about gun control, right?
Mm-hmm.
This should be a conversation that's ongoing, that should, just like the financial market and how that grows, so does technology, and so does the use of weapons. And so that conversation needs to be had. This one probably could have been prevented with some easier fixes in the legislation, right? Honestly, I don't know how it takes you from till 21 to be able to buy an alcoholic drink, but you can buy a firearm at the age 18. That's a conversation that needs to be had. Mental health is certainly a conversation that needs to be looked in when it comes around to purchasing firearms. These are very easy fixes that just won't get done, because if we look at it, Farajii, we're talking about over 20 years. Just looking at a 20-year span, the NRA is probably, in political terms, the most powerful lobby there is. They spend upwards of over $150 million within that time period. And these are just the direct contributions that they give legislators. We're not even talking about the level of millions and billions of dollars they spend on attack ads, on support ads for those who support their measures, and attack ads against their opponents. So, as we said, to me, it's a very easy fix. And that fix is this: campaign finance reform. If you take money out of the political process, the campaign process, that no longer becomes the key issue. So we don't have to worry about legislators who, like the United Ted Cruz, who is the #1 profitable U.S. senator in Congress right now, getting money from the NRA. You won't have to worry about that. So campaign finance reform will then allow for these individuals running for Congress, for local offices, and we've seen it across the country. We have it right here in Maryland, and in Baltimore just passed it. They no longer can take money from PACs and these bigger organizations. They only can get $250 or less donations from individual voters. That is something right then and there that you can kind of really take a big bite out of the lobbying group, but you never see that happen because it eats at the core of their power.
And Hassan, how do we make sense of the fact that like for example today, Senate Republicans they blocked a bill to create a domestic terrorist office within the Justice Department of Homeland Security. Now, this bill within federal law enforcement agencies, in response to the mass shooting in Buffalo that left 10 people dead. I mean, we're seeing this constant blockage from Senate Republicans. Senate Republicans are blocking, the conversation around gun access. Senate Republicans are blocking the conversation around, stricter background checks. Now we're seeing that they're blocking the bill around creating a domestic terrorist office within federal law enforcement agencies. It seems like these issues are so much bigger than parties, and now we're at this point where it's just absolutely, it's this thing across it comes off as insanity.
And it absolutely is. It's political insanity to a point that we elect these individuals to go to Congress to represent our interests, not their own. And many a times we know, we've seen it time and time again, they represent first their own interests, second their party's interests, third, way down the line, is their constituents' interests. That is the problem. So, both parties do it. And I don't want to, what we're looking at now when we talk about voting rights, all right, that is being blocked by the Republican Party. No, there's no qualms about that. When we talk about the legislation you talked about that was just introduced, that's the Republicans. But we also have to have both sides of the party, on both sides of the aisle, be mature enough to put the partisanship aside and say, let's sit down and craft comprehensive legislation that makes sense for all parties, for all individuals who can go back and stuff. Because unfortunately, instead of thinking about what's right, Farajii, they're thinking about what's politically inducive for them when it's time for run for re-election, right?
And this is
that is
and
the
that's
problem.
that's the number one problem.
Right.
Of course, we talk about it often here on this platform. Brother Roland talks about it. That's the number one problem. And even, you know what? And I would even go as far as to say this, Hassan. Even if the Democrats started to take certain stances on certain things, I would blast them too. You know, I mean, that's just the number one problem in this country. We are going down, and like this latest bill that was blocked by the Senate Republicans, they went down party lines, 47-47. So that's the number one problem. I want to share, you know, for those that may not be too familiar with understanding why this talk of gun lobby, gun control is so important. Check this out. I want to share this, Keenan. Let's post this quote. This is something that I want people just to kind of understand, just from an educational point of view. But look, the so-called gun lobby in the U.S. is a broad term that encompasses efforts to influence both state and federal policy on guns, usually through supporting candidates who have pledged opposition to gun control measures. Now, along with that, it includes direct contributions to legislators, efforts to independently support elected officials, and campaigns to sway public opinion on issues related to firearms. Such lobbying is often carefully calibrated to navigate U.S. election finance laws. And then there are several investigations that have shown that major anti-gun control lobbying groups, notably the most prominent, the National Rifle Association, have close ties with the multi-billion-dollar firearms industry in the U.S. This is information we got from Al Jazeera. That's being the case, Hassan. That being the case, it's like the gun lobby has paid and bought these politicians, these legislators, at the expense of the livelihood of the American people. And 9 out of 10 times, or maybe 10 out of 10 times, they use the Second Amendment as the reason. Oh, well, the Second Amendment, you have a right to bear arms. Okay, that may be so, but do you have a right to have an 18-year-old buy a high-powered rifle with no real restrictions, who ends up committing such a massacre that we saw just a few days ago in Uvalde? That's
absolutely. So NRA, gun control organizations like the NRA are one cog of the wheel, right? You have tobacco lobbyists. You have a lot of lobbyists for industries that are killing Americans across the board. We continuously focus on the NRA, one, because of it, when incidents like this occur, it becomes a national tragedy, and people start to focus on it. And two, because of the level of money and influence that they have in Congress. Again, take that campaign finance reform, you take the money out of at least direct contributions. We know that the NRA and other groups like them will then use that money to run their own independent advertisement, right? And that's fine. But we have to start by first taking money out of the political process. The second thing I would kind of raise is you have to have measures in place to be able to really govern how things are regulated in this country. I know a lot of Republicans are more federalist. They don't want kind of those regulations around industries like this. But when you have an 18-year-old, like we talked about, having the right to walk into a store, let's be honest, Farajii, if the person wants to shoot and kill somebody, whether they can go into a gun store legally or buy it illegally on the street, they're going to do that. But to have common sense approaches to how the age restrictions, the mental health restrictions, is all I think most Americans would argue for. Even those, because honestly, Farajii, the majority of this country are pro-guns in terms of responsibility, not terms of, most of them do want to reform gun reform laws here in America. But if you've seen countries like that are right to carry, there are a lot less incidents of incidents like we've seen in Baltimore City and other urban cities, because now you have a person who, with the thought in the back of their mind is, this person may be strapped. So I can't, just do what I would normally do for somebody I know isn't going to carry guns. So, but this is a conversation that you, I, and the media and the American people continue to have. When incidents like this happen, it becomes a big national story. And then 2 weeks from now, we're not talking about it anymore. And then those Congress individuals get to go on to the next thing, and we never really hold them accountable for putting something through.
That's true. I want to take just a quick moment because we have folks checking in. Folks, post your comments on our YouTube page, Facebook page, and we'll get to your comments. But let me just let's throw these comments up really, really quickly as we continue to have this conversation. Timothy Johnson, I hope I'm saying that correctly. Timothy said, Ted Cruz said we have to keep locked doors one way in and out, and armed officers at that entrance daily. Wow. Yeah, I'm surprised that they don't. I know in the state of Maryland, like, schools keep their doors locked. So I that is one good point, Timothy, that I was surprised that the schools were open.
Right, and no armed security in Maryland. Again, 23 out of the 24 jurisdictions, Baltimore City is the only jurisdiction that does not have armed security police and or police that monitor schools across the jurisdictions. That's one of the arguments we've been making to arm our school security here in Baltimore, but across the country, that is an issue. Our children should, number one, not only have locked doors, but given the climax that we are in currently, Farajii, every school to me should have metal detectors. If you're going through a federal government building, you have to go through metal detectors. It's clear that our children in Baltimore, Mervo High School, 3 incidents now of a student found with a gun in their locker. This is a perpetual incident that's happened across the country. We have to start putting common sense steps in place to make sure things like this never happen in the future.
Absolutely. Folks, we're going to take a quick pause. When we come back, more conversation about this. And, we're going to continue to discuss with Mr. Politics Hassan Giordano the implications of, guess what, folks? There's a convention happening right now in Houston, Texas, by the National Rifle Association about guns. Can you believe the timing of everything? Now, this convention, of course, was already planned, but imagine the timing of going into this convention. So we'll have the details about the convention and, most importantly, like the implications that it has on the larger conversation about guns in schools and violence in this country. So stay with us. We'll get to more of your comments and a whole lot more of the conversation. So stay with us. It's The Culture right here on the Black Star Network.
Welcome you to the launch of the Mass Poor People's Low Wage Assembly and Moral March on Washington, D.C., June 18, 2022.
We are a new unsettling force, and we are powerful. New unsettling force, and we are here.
We're rising up to demonstrate the compelling power that we, poor and low-income people, have to reconstruct society from the bottom up.
And we need to do it with the loudest voices possible, the biggest actions possible.
Because we know that there is no scarcity in this land. The only scarcity is the moral will to do what's right.
Hold on, just a little while longer.
We are those with sub-minimum wage jobs who can't afford sky-high rent.
People with disabilities are the fastest growing minority group.
It's crazy to me that in 2021, it's still legal for workplaces to pay a sub-minimum wage to people with disabilities.
There are still so much trial and tribulations that we go through as Indigenous people. We can't get a decent wage to sustain ourselves, nor can we get adequate housing.
Veterans across this nation say enough is enough. We can't pat essential workers on the back on one day and then cut their health care the next day.
Health is a political choice.
What more do I need to do
to prove that my voice is just as valuable as anyone else's.
There are still forces in denial that would try to slow walk our transition to a clean economy and a just future for us all.
We have an immoral system run by immoral people.
But together we walk and we fight.
It's time for a change. Reconstruyamos esta gran nación.
See, we are people of resilience as we fight these interlocking injustices together.
When we work together, mobilize together, and rise together, we become a voice for the voiceless, and we become an agent of change in a time where great change is needed.
We need the third Reconstruction to ensure that deaf people, people with disabilities, and all people can have the right to live and to thrive.
We know what they are doing, but the question is, what are we going to do? Reconstruction begins when we change our mentality and say it's time for you to get your foot off of my neck.
I know justice is coming soon.
Hey, do you believe that of today?
Pull up a chair, take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
Folks, we are continuing our coverage and conversations around what has happened in Uvalde, Texas, where 21 people were shot and killed, 19 being students, small elementary age students, and 2 adults. And this massacre has opened up a big conversation about guns in this country. And so it is interesting as this tragedy happened. The National Rifle Association, the NRA, hosted its 151st convention right in Houston as we speak. And such Republican luminaries include Ted Cruz, Governor Greg Abbott, and former President Donald Trump are all expected to share remarks at the NRA convention. And many are wondering what will be said, what will be planned, and most importantly, what will be the implication of these of convention goers going to the NRA convention, and how will that play out on the bigger discussion around gun control? We've been joined by Hassan, Mr. Politics Giordano, who serves as the owner of DMV Daily Media. Hassan, again, thank you so much, brother, for your time. This convention, it was some calls to the mayor of Houston, Mayor Sylvester Turner, to essentially cancel this convention because of what just happened in Texas. He said he would not do that because that would open the city up to legal issues. So he can't cancel it. But he did criticize some pro-gun politicians because of their stand. My question to you, bro, is this convention being had in Texas right after this, do you think that this will create some momentum to have some different conversations about guns? Do you think that President Trump, Ted Cruz, do you think that something will be said different? Something different will be said at this convention?
Absolutely not. I mean, I think to the benefit, if you can't offer the condolences to the parents of these children on one day and then turn around and talk about the need for more guns 3 days later or 2 days later at the convention. However, knowing and seeing the actions of President Donald Trump since he's been in office, I think he will take this opportunity, as will Ted Cruz and probably Texas Governor Greg Abbott, though he's going to walk a finer line in trying to rile their base up. We know that their base are pro-Second Amendment, pro-gun lobbying individuals. And so they're not going to go in there with a mindset of reform. Trust and believe that. If anything, they're going to go in there making the argument that this young man purchased the gun legally, and it had nothing to do with the gun laws. It had everything to do with his mental health, as we heard Governor Abbott talk about the other day. Even though he had no there was no documented mental health issues related to this young man, the governor went so far to say, if you do something like this, clearly you have mental health issues. Well, guess what? Just last month, this governor, Greg Abbott, in the state that is the worst among mental health across the entire United States, slashed over $200 million from the department that oversees mental health. So you can't sit there on one hand and talk about the need for mental health because this individual clearly had mental health issues, and yet on the other hand, you're slashing programs that would go towards strengthening mental health and issues across your state. Again, Texas is the worst state in the country when it comes to mental health. But you can best believe that they're going to play up this mental health issue and kind of not speak to the need for reform, because they know that's not in their best interest in terms of who follows them. And if you've seen President Trump and seen his actions over the past 5-6 years, you know that he doesn't shy away from his base. He's never going to say anything to upset his base. It may upset rational-minded individuals like you and I,
right?
But will never do anything to upset the apple cart of his Republican conservative base.
That's crazy. Absolutely insane. Let's go to some more of the comments that folks are posting. And folks, post your comments on YouTube, Facebook, as we're having this conversation. The NRA convention is happening in Texas. And some of you folks are in Texas watching. You know how serious this situation is. It's happening in Houston. Thousands are, have thrown to the city of Houston to try to make a claim that it's not guns that aren't the problem, it's people. And I think that's the overall sentiment. All right, I want to go to McCole Spicer, one of our loyal watchers here, to share her thoughts on this issue, Keenan. Let's post McCole's comment. McCole said, one would think that the NRA would cancel their convention out of respect. I'm just saying. Yeah, I mean, goes right to your point, Hassan. Rational thinking in people. You probably be like, you know what? Let's okay, we can't cancel it because people have already made the plans. This has happened a couple of days before. We can't cancel it. But one would think that maybe something can be said. You know, the NRA would put something. I'm with you, McCole, but we're not dealing with rational thinking people. We're dealing with dollars and cents, people who only think about the bottom line. And I think that's one of the problems. Bottom line and keeping power. Janelle Fields checked in. Janelle said, the GOP is protecting their own. They are too afraid that they'll be immediately pulled into the definition of domestic terrorism that they can't vote for the bill.
But see, part of that problem too is because we just had this issue with, again, the conversation only shifts when things happen, right? It's a reactionary type of way to do politics. And that's the problem with this country, is that we're never proactive. It's always about after George Floyd has been killed, right? After all these young children and teachers have been killed, are we finally talking about and trying to address something that needed to be dealt with for years, if not decades, in this country? And the problem with that is, even from the Democratic standpoint, you don't see a real push in Congress. There was never a push for a domestic terrorism bill until this happened. And instead of them sitting down with the opposite side, even if they told them, kick rocks, I'm not going to deal with you, at least try to have that conversation on, let's put together some things in this bill that we can get done on day one, that we can at least get passed first, but number two, get something done to start to move this train forward. And you don't see that, including we just saw with the abortion. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago when the leaked decision or preliminary decision from the Supreme Court. Then Democrats offer up a piece of legislation that they throw together overnight. Yeah. That clearly does a disservice to the American people because they know it wasn't going anywhere. They know damn well they ain't got the votes to get it passed. So what is the purpose of even bringing it up to get people's hopes up if you know that it's not going to go anywhere? Same thing with voting rights. They're not doing the real work, Farajii, to get this legislation from voting rights to gun control measures to the abortion protection. None of these things are actually being worked on from A to Z. They're just throwing something together and throwing it out there so they can then run on a platform of, oh, look what I did. We introduced this legislation, but in the back of that, what they won't put on their commercials on their lit is we knew damn well it wasn't going to go anywhere.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the fact that in 2021, the NRA themselves have spent $5 million in their lobbying efforts to legislators. So they're putting money on the table, folks. And I've talked about this. I went to tell you to check out Open Secrets. And on Open Secrets, it breaks down how much of the money is going to, specific legislators and how much is put into the lobby. But there are millions of dollars to encourage legislators to support or to create policy that supports gun ownership and making sure that guns stay excuse me, to make sure that guns stay in the hands of the American people. Let's go to Mike. Thank you, Jay, for your comment. Mike V. Mike, always good to hear from you. The NRA spent $30 million on Trump, the most of any sitting U.S. president in history. Well, when you got a person that's going to advocate, who is, I wouldn't be surprised how much money Tucker Carlson gets for advocating some of the ideas and conspiracy theories he put out there. You know what I mean? They're going to go. And see, here's the thing too, Hassan, because I think this is a lesson to be learned. And I'm glad Mike brought this up. The thing is that we don't understand that, yes, voting a person is one thing, putting money in their pocket is a whole different level of accountability, right? Like we as Black people in this country, we have kind of been taught all of our lives, hey, just vote and then hope for the best. You putting $30 million in a pocket. No, sir, son. We own you. We own you.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And I think that, as crazy as this sounds, like Black folks, we should do the same thing when it comes to issues of importance. We can't just keep relying on the vote. I mean, that's all well and good. You start to say, look, I need you to put, you put a couple of $1 million on the table and say, I need you to look at violence. I need you to get our schools better. Here's a couple of $1 million for that. Now, we're going to hold you accountable. Different level of engagement with political leadership. What's your take on that?
Well, there's an old saying, Farajii, that says, don't hate the player, hate the game. Right. And again, that speaks right to this point. I don't put no hatred towards the NRA. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing, because at the end of the day, they get their money from the listen to the words, National Rifle Association. They don't get their money from reform or none of this other stuff that we're talking about. They get their money from selling weapons. So of course they're going to want every regulation in place that allows them to do that. You and I are Black media. People might not like Black media, especially if they don't look like us. But guess what? If we had the money, we would be putting money into the lobbying group too, to make sure Black media gets a certain amount of the pie coming from Congress. Everybody in their interests are going to do that. Like you said, the most important part that we have to understand is the election of an individual is just the beginning. That is not the end all be all, because you have to, again, lobbying Black people. You don't see Black PACs out there. We have the Collective PAC. They started it maybe a couple of years ago. I think they're probably the most successful at this point that I see out of Atlanta, trying their best to put money behind candidates that they support. But again, they don't even have enough to get through the election process, let alone to have an arm like the NRA has an arm that does lobbying, that puts in, campaign commercials and so forth. We have to understand that dollars make sense. And that's all that makes sense to many of these politicians. I tell people all the time, you want to know about politics? It's real simple. They only care about two things: money and power. People and money. It's about numbers. Like you said, women lie, men lie, numbers don't.
Numbers
they
don't, bro.
understand that.
Numbers don't. Let's go to Brother King Lee's comment, Keenan, when he talks about lobbying, as we just made that point. Well, that is what lobbying is all about. It is about buying access to influence policy, regardless of the political parties.
And again, campaign finance reform. If you take that part out of politics, you won't have to worry about that.
Right.
But they'll never change that because they know that takes money out of there. How do you think these people go to Congress damn near broke, and then everybody who leaves are millionaires? Come on. It's don't take a rocket scientist to figure out this is a hustle. And then if you try to knock somebody's hustle, they'll do everything they can to stop.
Wow. Damn. This is a hustle. Woo! Strong words there. Danita checked in. Danita Jackson. Danita said, look, they have the nerve to say that regulations will criminalize legal gun owners. How per se would that happen if you aren't doing anything illegal, i.e. mass murders? How does that work, Hassan? How does that benefit gun owners when they talk about, or does that put gun regulations, does that put gun owners in a tight spot? Legal gun owners, I'm speaking of.
No, it shouldn't. I mean, common sense regulations that I've heard that I would really. I mean, there are some that are being proposed that go to me way too far because I'm a proponent of carrying a weapon, right? Especially in this country, in the color of the skin that I got, and I've taught my kids from giddy up how to shoot and how to aim. But I also know that my 15-year-old child is not ready or equipped to possess a firearm, right? We have to put regulations in place that an 18, 19, 20-year-old, I don't think has the mental capacity or capability to own a firearm at that time. I'm sorry, they just don't. Give it some time, give it 21, 25, whatever the age. The same thing with purchasing big AR-15s and things of that sort. There's no reason whatsoever a 18, 19, 20, or even a 20-some-year-old, anybody needs an AR-15 in America. You don't. If you want to protect yourself, a 9mm would do just fine. Even a 22. You don't need these big cannon guns here in America. Now, if you rightfully are a part of the military or you're hunting a certain livestock, then maybe, right? But then you should get a waiver for that. But we don't have those regulations. So those type of regulations make common sense. And I think the greater majority of America believes in those sort of rights. Even those who have the right to carry, who believe in the Second Amendment, actually believe that certain regulations like those are common sense and should be passed tomorrow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Folks, we've been talking to Mr. Hassan, Mr. Politics Giordano, who is the owner of DMV Daily Media, talking about the NRA's convention, how the NRA is hosting its convention as we speak right now in Houston, Texas. 55,000 people are expected to be in Houston for this convention this week. And the likes of former President Donald Trump, Senator Ted Cruz, Governor Greg Abbott, and other Republican superstars are expected to give remarks and say some words at this convention. Forensic accountant, let's go to forensic accountant. Forensic said, look, as a solutions hungry people, let's talk about people like Dante Barksdale, who was a community leader for Safe Streets here in Baltimore, and the price we often pay when we try to bring peace to the streets. Dante was shot and killed while doing his work of stopping the violence in Baltimore. A very, very just sad situation. But one of the things to Forensic's point of, bringing peace to the streets, let's talk about the price that we pay. Like, if you speak out against violence in this country, if you speak out against the gun lobby, Hassan, if you go against the NRA, there's going to be some really heavy consequential resistance and pushback that you're going to experience. And that's crazy considering, like, we already know the impact that violence has on children, the impact that violence has on our communities. But even if you speak out against it, it's like you become a target.
Well, to me, the greatest contradiction in this country, Farajii, is what they call free speech, because speech ain't never been free in this country, especially for Black people. And we've seen this. You look at movies and you see individuals who they call whistleblowers who stand up to government, intrusions and things that they see that's going wrong, and they end up being killed, right? That ain't fake. Where do you think they came up with these plots from? That's real. So let alone the NRA and more powerful lobbies, speak up against the American government and see what happens to you, right? Especially if you come after people like the FBI, the CIA, the DEA, people in those particular realms. And I'm not talking about just speaking up just as a crazy getting on, just offering some rants. I'm talking about having some real evidence against them and a following behind you. We've seen it from the Black Panther Party, over the decades, how they've consistently and systematically eliminated our leaders. Yep. And it's on purpose. This is the American government doing this. This isn't NRA, this ain't no other lobbies. This is the American government. They taught us and the NRA and everybody else what to do against your opposition. So unfortunately, we do see that. But on the flip side of Dante and Safe Streets, which is a very powerful program here, we just saw, an individual who was accused of killing a Safe Street worker get off today here in the city of Baltimore, not guilty because the state's attorney ain't know what they were doing and brought a bogus case against the individual. But we got 300 plus homicides every year for the past almost 8 years now, Farajii.
Come on.
How does that relate to gun control? Because most of those individuals killing individuals on the streets of Baltimore did not legally get their gun from a legal gun purchase. Right? That is an argument that they don't want to talk about, is the illegal manufacturing of guns being brought in to urban cities like Baltimore, Detroit, Chicago, and others that continuously allow our people to kill our people without any real retribution. So again, this conversation is so large
huge,
that it needs to be broken down, talked about, and really pushed realistically to put together some things and put it in the hands of those who are really going to stand up and fight for its passage. Unfortunately, I don't know too many of them with the testicular fortitude that will stand up and get something done in Congress.
No, brother, not at all. I don't know a lot of folks either. And it's absolutely sad that we are in this place in this country and that we have to have these conversations and we have to try to convince people that, certain guns are not good for the American people. Let's go to Raymond's comment. Raymond checked it. Raymond Phillips, thank you so much. There's over 300 million guns in the country. No amount of gun laws will solve the problem. We have declined as a society and have a failed culture. I mean, I've said this before, and I'm gonna keep saying this. If we, a lot of these young people, and I'm thinking about the gunmen, Salvador, grow up in a very violent culture. We grow up around violence. We intimately understand and know the impact of violence in this country. And yet, we stay silent about it. And yet we choose not to get involved. And that has to change. That has to change. Karen M checked in. Karen said, look, we need to abolish lobbying all across the board. But I don't know if that could be even abolished though, Hassan, because lobbying is just about like advocating. And I just don't see that happening anytime soon.
No, it's too much money behind it.
I'm about to say too much money, bro.
You can end lobbying tomorrow by passing campaign finance reform. It'll never happen because, again, too much money involved, too many people of influence who get and benefit from that money. So, again, it will never happen because of those who are responsible in making that. But to your point is, people have to understand that I just drew a blank, but yeah, it's too powerful of a lobby. I was talking about your previous
comment,
and I forgot what it is because there's a new one on there, and I had a point to make, but
no, we were just talking. Let's go back to it. He said other countries have guns, and yet they don't. Oh, the 300 million guns in this country. No amount of gun laws will solve the problem.
Well, and it's true. And it's something that we talked about earlier in the program is many of these tragedies, Sandy Hook and others, aren't from people who any gun law restrictions would not have stopped it, right?
Right.
Like people say, guns don't kill people, crazy people with guns kill people. But here's the thing. In this country, we're way too lax in our policies, if you ask me. If we start getting to Sharia law that we see in the Middle East and countries that deal with, if you steal, you get your hand chopped off. You sleep with somebody else's wife, you get stoned to death. You kill somebody, you will get killed yourself.
Right.
Trust and believe it'll be an entirely different environment and culture in this country. It's funny because a British reporter was just asking Senator Ted Cruz why is America, that you say is so great and prosperous, why are they the only country in the world who continues to have these massacres if it's not for the regulations, some regulations of gun laws? And that is true. Look at countries across the world. They have nowhere near the mass incarceration that we have, nowhere near the mass casualties we have. And there's a reason behind that. What that reason is a conversation we need to have about. But at the end of the day is, I believe you start implementing Sharia law, trust and believe people are going to start to think once, twice, and a million times before they break the law.
Hey, look, let me tell you, you're not only stopping guns, you're stopping a lot of other things too if you start implementing Sharia law in this country. Let's go to getting a couple of more comments, and folks, keep them coming. We truly appreciate it. Like I said, Karen M said we need to abolish lobbying, which to your point, you talked about campaign finance. You talked about this, being able to work the system, to use the loophole of being able to put money into the pockets of these politicians. Look, I'm not against lobbying. I'm gonna tell you, Karen, I'm not against lobbying. I just think that black folks, we kind of late to the game because other people have always done that. Other groups have always done it, whether you're talking about gun enthusiasts, whether you're talking about the LGBTQIA community, whether you're talking about business owners, whether you're talking about bankers. We're slow to the game. Why? Because somebody fed us the bobo that voting by itself is all the power, the power's in the vote. A lot of the let me tell y'all something. And Hassan, correct me if I'm wrong. Probably these people that do the lobbying probably don't even vote for these people.
No, they don't even live in most of their
just see them as an end, as a way to get their agenda across. And that's what I'm saying to us. That, like, okay, this is the way the game is played. Bet. Let's figure something out. Let's like the groups that we see. And these are all groups, like all of these groups, the NRA, they learn how to, we're a nonprofit organization, or we're a political action committee, or they use all of these kind of like these ways and the categories that allow them to give without really being fully accountable to the American people. And I'm just saying, okay, if that's the way the game is played, we should be in the game.
Farajii, let me tell you something. If you give a legislator or anybody running for office the choice between, I'll either give you my vote or I'll write a $6,000 check to you, the max check for the. Give me the $6,000 because I can buy 600 more votes with that $6,000. You can have your vote. That's what people don't understand. Voting is very important. I don't want to take, I don't want nobody to think that we're talking saying voting is not important. It's very important. Kwesi Mfume would never have been who he is today had he not won by 3 votes initially for city council in 1978 here in Baltimore. So voting does matter, but so does, and even more powerful is the dollar bill and what you do in putting money up for candidates that you believe in, that will really represent your interests.
Yep. Let me go to B Dizzles. Investigate the B Dizzle. We want to get your comment up very quickly. B Dizzle, you said when it comes to putting in these Republican pockets, doesn't Citizens United play a role in what we're seeing? Politicians listening to very wealthy ones who can put the most in their pockets. Look, to B. Dizzle's point, I mean, to questions, yes, but here's our thinking. And Hassan, tell me if I'm wrong about this. Which party is the richest party, the Republicans or the Democrats?
Both. Neither one of them are starving for money, but Republicans probably bring in the most money in terms of fundraising because they are the party that better reflects, interest groups like the NRA and business. They are big businesses party, right? Democrats are more social economy, social agendas, which doesn't bring in a lot of money. That's why when you see these left-wing social, unless they're huge on Twitter, somebody like AOC who can raise money just by going on and putting out a tweet, most of them are broke. It's hard for them to raise money. Conservatives, for the large part, can raise a lot of money. And I have to push back against your B. Dizzle's comment because Citizens United played the most important role in putting money in their pockets because it allowed them to go beyond the limits. Campaign finance still has limits. $6,000 for state and local here in Maryland. I think it's $2,200 for Congress, and then you can flip that into your wife and your husband. But there are max limits to what you can donate federally and locally. Citizens United opened up the playbook, so now I can put together a PAC and raise unlimited amount of money, and then take that money and use that money and give it an unlimited amount of money to who I want to win that election, right?
Absolutely.
And putting forth endorsements, commercials, and so forth. So Citizens United purposely opened the door to open the floodgates of campaign finance, just flooding the political airwaves.
Absolutely. Hassan Giordano, Mr. Politics, we appreciate you as always, brother. Thank you so much for your insight, your analysis, and we'll certainly look forward to chatting with you next week.
Always a pleasure, brother. Can't wait.
Absolutely. All right, folks, look, we're going to take a quick pause. When we come back, let's have a conversation about George Floyd. Now, it's been 2 years later, and if you haven't noticed, well, maybe you have. Have you noticed any major police reform since the killing of our brother in 2020? We got to think about that one. Well, that's the big question. Is momentum for police reform fading in this country? We'll have that conversation with Culture Crew member Rashad Staten to get his analysis and, of course, get your take on it as well. And then also late in the hour, Colin Kaepernick. He's getting an official workout with the Las Vegas Raiders. We'll share with you what the owner, Mr. Davis, said about the MVP quarterback. And is there the possibility that after 5 years, Colin is back in the NFL? So we'll have those discussions as well. So stay with us. A lot to get to in the next hour right here on The Culture on the Black Star Network. We'll be right back.
Don't you think it's time to get wealthy? I'm Deborah Owens, America's Wealth Coach, and my new show on the Black Star Network focuses on the things your financial advisor or bank isn't telling you. So watch Get Wealthy on the Black Star Network.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for a Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie. We'll laugh together, cry together, pull ourselves together, and cheer each other on. So join me for new shows each Tuesday on Black Star Network, A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
Pull up a chair, take your seat. The Black Tape with me, Dr. Greg Carr, here on the Black Star Network. Every week, we'll take a deeper dive into the world we're living in. Join the conversation only on the Black Star Network.
All right, folks, welcome back to the second hour of today's show of The Culture here on the Black Star Network. First hour, we had a fantastic, very lively conversation with Mr. Politics Hassan Giordano about gun control and gun lobby, and of course, about the NRA's convention in Houston this week. Let me just tell you, I know some of you are probably going to hate me for this, but I'm very interested to hear what these political leaders have to say. I'm interested. I'm interested what Governor Greg Abbott has to say, President Trump, Ted Cruz. You know why I'm interested? I'm interested because how can you justify this massacre that we just saw in Uvalde? Like how do you clean that up and not look at the fact that we were dealing with an individual who had access to high-powered rifles and was able to create such a tragedy? How do you clean that up? I don't know, but I'll be interested to hear what they have to say. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm interested. Now, the other thing that we have to share with you very quickly before we move on to our next conversation is that President Biden has just came across the wire, folks. President Biden is planning to travel to Texas to show his comfort and support for the families of the victims for Uvalde, Texas. So it's going to be interesting. Can you imagine that? Let's just take a quick moment to reflect on the president having to speak on 2 national mass shootings within a couple of weeks' time. 2. Now, that's what the president is supposed to do, provide comfort, to provide assurance that something will be done. But just to know that these things are happening at the rate that they're happening, it's still mind-boggling. It's still hard to wrap my mind around. And now we're in a situation where it's not just a black thing. It's not just a white thing. It's a people thing. It's an American problem. It's an American problem. Wow. So we will certainly bring you up to, we'll keep you posted on that. But the White House did release a statement saying that the president and first lady would visit Texas to grieve with the community that lost 21 lives in the horrific elementary school shooting. And that as a nation, President Biden said, I think we must all must be there for them. Well, certainly my heart and prayers go out to the families of the Uvalde mass shooting. And I hope your prayers go out to them, because those children certainly didn't go to school to deserve that type of tragedy. And so I'm gonna tell you, folks, I'm still aching from hearing about this. As more and more information come out, it's just sad. And certainly we're going to have a conversation about the police response. I know many of you are probably like, well, what about the police? And I want to make sure we get the information straight there. But we will have a conversation about how did the police respond? Why didn't they respond? Just a lot of the scrutiny, but we'll certainly talk about that. But on another point, yesterday marked the 2-year anniversary of the killing of George Floyd. If you haven't had a chance to do this, I would highly encourage you to check out what Brother Roland did on the streets of DC, on the streets of Black Lives Matter Plaza, right outside of our studio headquarters, and as he talked to the families of police brutality. Fantastic show yesterday, and you can find that all streaming right now on blackstarnetwork.com. But I would highly advise you to check that out, just to hear the stories and to understand the complexity of this issue of police brutality as we acknowledge those 2 years since the killing of our brother, of George Floyd. Now, the question that I have is that, and there's another piece that I think we were trying to get him onto the show. We did not get him, but there's a piece that Charles Blow, who is a writer, op-ed writer, columnist for the New York Times, this brother here wrote a piece about what he calls the Great Erasure. And he talks about how artists who've used their talent, they use their skills and their creativity to create these murals across the country. Of course, around, we started to see these street murals of Black Lives Matter. And he said just basically over the course of 2 years, these murals that once were emblazoned on public spaces are no longer there, are now gone. And it's called The Great Erasure. It's a dynamic piece in the New York Times, but it speaks volumes about where we are in this country, about understanding the process for change in this country. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart, that when you're talking about movement building, that the big element to keep the pressure going is consistency. It's easy to get people riled up, to get people excited, to get people emotional, to hit the streets when a moment like what we saw with George Floyd happens. And I'm saying that it's easy because people it strikes you, it resonates with you, it gets to your soul of who you are to see that level of brutality on video as a man screams, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe." That's easy to get people out there, but it's not as easy to keep people out there. It's not as easy to keep people motivated. It's not as easy to keep the pressure and accountability on political officials and others to change policing in this country. We talked about the NRA in the first hour, but do you really understand and this is my homework to all of you that are watching today, check out what the budget is for your police departments in your respective city, your respective state, your wherever you are. How much money goes to your local police department? How much money is in the budget for public safety? And then here's the other part of the homework. And then look at how much money is put into education, social programs, and other priorities and needs of the people for right where you are. You will find, folks, that a vast majority of money is often put into public safety programs and public safety institutions like the police department, of course, the fire department, but a lot more money is put into policing in states across this country than it is in education. And I was always taught, and you may have heard the same thing, the priority is not with lip service. The priority is in that budget line. That's how you know the priority of any administration from local to national. If it's in the budget line, that's when you know that they're committed and they're serious about that effort. So my question as we have this discussion about George Floyd is the momentum, the call for police reform, is that fading? And that is one of the big questions. I want to bring in culture crew member Richest Staton to give us some insight about this, as Richest has been working in the nonprofit sector as an advocate and an activist on this conversation for a very long time. Richest, I just had to set it up, brother, to talk about this ongoing dynamics and what we're seeing in this country, because I'm seeing a slow fire. I'm seeing people getting less angry. We move on to the next thing already. You know what I mean? Now, from it used to be police reform in 2020. Now the big conversation, of course, is abortion. Now with these mass shootings, it's gun laws. And it's like we get schizophrenic when it comes to these issues, and then wonder why we can't get any real reconciliation or resolution to our problems. What's your take on, is the momentum fading for police reform after 2 years after George Floyd? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, brother, I think you're hitting just on spot on, like you always do. I think we are seeing smoldering of the fire that we burn inside of this entire country and a society, trying to face the realities of, the disproportionality and involvement of police targeting Black and brown folks. And we start to see that, it's a multitude of different issues, but I think what we're starting to see is a shift in a space of prioritizing what really matters, that we are in this world right now where we're really tapping into sensationalism. What is viral, what is happening at the moments that we start to lose sight of what we've already gained some progressionary steps towards. And that was one around police reform. I think, and after you went from our Black Lives Matter to we can't breathe to, all right, we want to we want to reform the police to now abolishing the police into a space of now we've lost sight of how to even go forward to getting systemic change as far as policies and things of that sort. Because once the talk is not on the front page news, it now has to be in boardrooms. It has to be with constituents holding their elected officials accountable. It's not cool and relevant because it's not being driven by sound bites. But now this type of movement takes the intuitiveness and the steadfast commitment that those that are on the political arena, those that understand civic engagement, those that understand policy, and those that understand advocacy has to be willing to know that most policy and reforming of legislation won't happen within one electoral cycle. Right. And if that vote and things are not going in favor for what we're fighting for, we must be cognitive enough to bring it back to the table, back to when the General Assemblies are open, back to when Congress is now in those seats. And we have to be mindful of that. We have to build these front end and back end relationship with our elected officials in these agencies. And most of the time, those are the tenuous processes that does not sound cool once we're getting off the streets. We have to be able to be mindful that we got to get off the streets of galvanizing and organizing, that same hard work, that same strategic planning, that same civic engagement effort has to translate back to the boardrooms. It has to translate on the House floors. It has to be transferred in transferable language with tangible solutions and incremental changes, right? And those incremental changes is not a cool thing unless you have a passion and a commitment for it. So once they move from the front of our TV screens and now they're moving onto paper, how do we teach our communities of how to continuously be a part of this strategic movement? We have to start calling in our elected officials. We have to show up and give testimonies. We must appear at public hearings, right? We have to be intentional to making sure that we're prioritizing where that money is allocated. And I think you hit it on the nose, Farajii. Even after these years and 2 years of George Floyd, we have to be able to track the money. And we have to be mindful that a lot of this is public information. But this, because it's public information, does not mean it's going to be easily accessible. So we got to know how to go in and search, right? We have to know that Twitter is not going to put a hyperlink in there for us to know how to go and look at our law enforcement budget versus the public educational or the private educational budgets in itself, or how money is being allocated to our nonprofits and grassroots leaders. They're not going to teach us this. So we have to be willing to, like, again, what we always say, we can't look to a Jay-Z, we can't look to a LeBron to tell us how to do that. We must be vigilant enough to understand who is the change agents in our community that does not get the accolades, that does not get the platform, that does not get the visibility, that can inform us of when we need to step back at and take a seat at the table.
Absolutely, brother. Absolutely. And I think, Rashad, to your points, there are some real issues that I think that we as the American people, we as Black folks in this country, it seems like we a lot of times the ball is dropped because we don't know how to organize. We don't know the power. Like along the way, somewhere along the line, we have lost the vision, and we underestimated the power of organizing. You know, something that we've been promoting here on Black Star Network is the march with Reverend William Barber that's coming up in next month in DC. And I love this idea, the ideas behind this march, and of course is talking about, you know, calling this country to a better moral position, and then also is talking about, you know, really thinking about the poor of this country, the low wage workers of this country that have to carry the brunt of this of where we are. But one of the things that I saw as we were running the ads earlier is that it was about understanding the importance and values and the value of mobilizing, organizing, educating. It said registering people, but mobilizing and organizing. Like if any group of people once they understand the power of their presence, once they understand how to strategically bring their ideas to the table and then strategically placing a demand on the institution or on a person. Like, once you understand the science and the power of mobilizing and organizing, then you have the power to change the reality that you're seeking. But it seems like we are in this cultural space where to become an organizer, to mobilize people, it's fun, it's exciting, but we're not always in it for the long haul. And we often talk about the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement, there were moments in the civil rights movement, and I think just walk with me on this one, folks, and Rashad. The civil rights movement was able to mobilize and organize Black people across this country when there wasn't any internet, when we didn't have that level of infrastructure, technological infrastructure. We didn't have all of these other devices. And they were able to mobilize and create a movement through the phone, word of mouth, right? And getting people committed just through the hearts and the minds and the spirits of the people. And it's like, we can learn a lot from that. One of the things that I learned in talking to past leaders, they said, Farajii, when there was a death in Alabama, we felt it in California. When there was a lynching in Texas, we felt lynched in Chicago. There was a connectivity there that when the movement started to get a little slow, when the progress started to get a little bit, started to slow down a little bit, you had other people in the network. And it's like getting back to that place, getting back to understanding that when we come together, our voices, our bodies, our resources as a people, that is more powerful than policy. And I'll never forget hearing the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He put it like, he said, our unity is more powerful than an atomic bomb. So if we unite now in this day and time, look at how George Floyd has brought Black people, white people, Latinos. I remember when George Floyd happened, and I remember watching the news in Los Angeles in the summer of 2020, Latinos came out in protest. Why? Because they understood Latino brothers and sisters get harassed and brutalized. You know what I'm saying? Like, you work from a common denominator to build the power of the movement. Work from a common denominator to become that bomb to blow up the system. And I think that's something that the enemy of our rise have understood, and they have been able to disrupt, and that we as a people, we don't understand the power of that. What's your take on that, bro?
No, I think you nailed it at that last point where you said, I think we are in a society still have this collective thinking of empathy and understanding each other's experience. And George Floyd, unfortunate life being taken away was one of those where we seen people of all ethnicities, all out races galvanized, like you said, and mobilized on the streets in these campaigns of we can't breathe and working towards some instance of reform. But similar to your comparison to our civil rights movements, what we've seen in the past versus the lack thereof that we're seeing in the present is this portion around education. Yeah, we do a great job in using our social platforms to mobilize and to raise the level of consciousness and awareness, but we need those same hyper visible leaders to use those platforms to give us these very step-by-step guides of education. And if not, they must move themselves from these very public spaces and taking up the soapbox operas to give it back to the organizers that are on the ground, whereas though it's a place where they can educate back in the communities, on stoops, in our rec rooms, in places in our churches and things of that sort. And that was the component to the civil rights movement when they were doing the freedom rides, when you started to see white undergraduate students, Jewish students, and Black students come from north down to the south to say that this movement impacts us all. And we started to see not just Black lives being murdered, but, you know, white Jewish kids and white kids in general going missing along with Black bodies, that it was a collective community. But after they did these movements to say that the entire country is impacted by racism and discrimination, what they did was, after getting on the news, freedom rides turned into voter registration and educational initiatives. And once they were able to register folks, they then started to educate the folks on how to go around advocating for policy and legislation and try to dismantle what discrimination and segregation had done to the society for so long. Right. And what we see now in today's world is, now we have these very visible leaders, and we see how some of our entertainers and public figures are corralled to be our spokesperson around activism. But since they have the lack thereof, or the lack of knowledge, or some spaces of ignorance, and ignorance is not a bad thing, but if that is not your forte, we can't expect them to operate in their full element. So when they take up these spaces, those like you and I, and those that are on the ground every day, giving their lives and sacrificing themselves as change agents, they don't have those same platforms of 1,000 to 1 million followers to say, hey, I need you to call your elected officials this time. Hey, I need you to show up for this public hearing. Hey, I need you to submit your lived experience of harassment and being and experiencing dehumanization by law enforcement. They don't have those same accessibilities to a large masses as those that have been perpetuated to be our leaders, when in fact they were never our leaders to begin with. Right. So we see that lack of connecting and accessibility to those that have been assigned by the powers that be, or assigned by our higher power, God or Allah, or whoever set them to be our catalyst for changes in today's world. We don't have that same connectivity. So a lot of times we have to revert our minds to receive information outside of the normal way that we have already been misguided to, and that is through Twitter and through Instagram and to TikTok. We can't expect that to be our news broadcasting anchors. We can't expect that to be our educational anchors. We need our HBCUs. We need our community colleges. We need our teachers, similar to what the civil rights movement did on D-Day. We need our teachers to say, hey, I'm going to turn my back. And when I turn my back, if you're not here anymore, I'm still counting you as present for the day, because we need your presence to be out there on the streets. We need those collective thinkings, and we don't need social media to have a collective thinking and strategy of people. We need us to be able to connect as humans and say, hey, when my spirit and my soul is intact with another person that loses their life, I know I have to do my part.
Yep. Look, let me just share with you as we kind of close out on this conversation. McCole checked in and said those who were involved in the civil rights movement were focused and on one accord with the vision and the mission of the movement. That's what it comes down to. That's what it comes down to. We can't lose focus on this movement, right? If we're talking about police reform, police accountability, look, we see it. We are experiencing it in cities across this country, black communities and brown communities. We are seeing it. We are seeing where the police have failed us. Now, the conversation about defunding, abolishing the police, I'm not there. I'm gonna be honest with you yet, Brother Rashad. I ain't there. Because why? We don't have a community alternative for that. We can talk about community policing, but I'm saying we don't have a full infrastructure in place yet to be an alternative to the policing system that we have right now, right? So if you say, oh, I don't want no police to come through the neighborhood, and the way shootings are happening, stabbings are happening, the way robberies are happening, in our own community who has the capacity, who has the ability, who has the resources to work the community. Now, I would rather work with the police at this time than completely rule them out. That's a different thing, right? And if that working with the police can be a number of ways. It can be more Black officers from the community joining the police force. It could be more community policing. There's a program here in Baltimore, for example, where the Baltimore City Police Commissioner Michael Harrison has created a deputizing citizens to help with homicides and other investigations. I mean, there's a number of things that can be done. I'm not at the point of no police at all. Let's talk about reform. Let's get a win. That's all I'm saying, Rashad. Let's get a win first, right? If it's a win, could be stopping the use of certain police tactics, right? The no-knock warrants, stop and frisk, chokeholds, or other type of maneuvers to take that can be deadly maneuvers when taking down potential suspects. I mean, looking at the policy, let's look at qualified immunity. Let's look at the fact that the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights, we should remove the clause about giving police officers days before they make an official statement. There are those things that can be done before we just say no police department at all. We don't have the capacity. We can't afford that right now. But while we're doing the reform work on the police, let's also do the community work of creating a cadre of men and women who are going to walk in those streets or walk those neighborhoods that some of us are afraid to go into, right? And help them to become a part of a different level of engagement for the community. You can have a police, but imagine if you have trained Black men and women to go who are already a part of those communities, who understand the culture of those communities, who also have built the relationships in those communities to be a part of that. And that's what I'm saying. Like, it can't be this one track mind. If you're talking about reform of anything in this country, it has to be a double, triple, quadruple prong approach. It can't just be one track and that's all everybody is, because everybody's not on that same page. But if you provide us with options, okay, so you don't want to go into the streets that way, this is where we need you. Can you provide some jobs? Okay, great. If you don't want to do community policing, what else are you going to do? You want to work with the girls? Cool. Focus it on that way. And if it's just those small things can create the momentum, I think, that we will see that within the next 2 years, we wouldn't be begging for political leadership to pass the George Floyd bill. But we putting all our eggs in that one basket. We putting all our eggs in, and I'm a huge advocate of the bill. I want the bill passed. But if you got jokers like Senator Tim Scott and other people that are going to block the bill, there's got to be some alternative means to get some justice for our people who have suffered at the hands of police brutality. There's got to be something else that can be done.
Yeah, and I agree. On top of that, what it has to be done is the understanding that, hey, this is not going to be immediate. This is going to be a long fight, and you have to be steadfast and you have to be committed, but you must go for those smaller wins that will build us up for the larger wins. So what you said, before we even get to this funding and abolishing, let's look at the strategic processes and the steps that we can do to go towards reforming. And if we're going towards reforming, we must be diligent as community leaders, change agents, and those that are experiencing these things in our community every day, for us to do the homework on the system that has been studying us for far too long, right? We have to be mindful and willing, and we have to be able to translate and educate our community of what the Bill of Rights policies are, right? Police Bill of Rights are. We have to be vigilant to understand what the data shows and where the fund is. We have to be able to turn numbers and humanize numbers so that we can see ourselves in these reports, that we can see ourselves in the policies, we got to be mindful of how civic engagement and policy actually works. If it doesn't pass under one administration, how do we pick it back up? If it doesn't pass within that same thing, how does the communities build infrastructure, programming? We build our own revenue model that we can sustain ourselves even when the government, federal, state, or local doesn't show up as our saviors. We have to be willing to save ourselves. And until we have a moral code, until we have an accountability measurement, we can't say completely get rid of, because we don't know if we're going to open the floodgates to a purge, right? So we got to be vigilant of ourselves, to be honest with our community, but we have to be willing to hold accountability on ourselves just as much as we hold accountability on the systems that we are looking forward to change.
Absolutely, brother. And, you know, to go back to one of my original points before we even had this conversation, we got to bring the artists back into the fold, because again, folks, when you read Charles Blow's a column about the Great Erasure, and you look, and he has pictures, the New York Times put out the pictures, in all your major cities that once donned Black Lives Matter on streets and roadways across the country, none of that is happening. I mean, like they're gone. So there isn't that constant reminder, because people need to be reminded in this day and time. Black Lives Matter. Even if you say, well, what about the organization? At this point, that's bigger than the organization. You know what I mean? It's a reaffirmation of the value and the importance of the preservation of Black life in this country. And if you have that going toward the White House, if you're going to have that on the roadway leading to your local city hall, if you got that on in a circle that is populated by business owners, like that stuff makes a difference. People have to say, "Oh yeah, meet me at Black Lives Matter Plaza." I mean, and I'm saying that from a cultural, artistic standpoint, that makes a difference. But when you start to see the pictures across this country, how things that we had Black Lives Matter emblazoned all over the place, gone. It's like hieroglyphics that's been covered by the sand, gone. And it does something. Like when I read that piece and when I saw the pictures, it kind of broke my heart a little bit, because I'm like, man, people were out. We were all out in 2020. We were all in for it. Just 2 years later, folks, and we like quiet. We like fading to black. And it's like, damn, we're gonna have to reinvigorate people all over again. That Black Lives Matter, that police reform is necessary, that George Floyd, the legacy, the life, and the death of George Floyd will not be in vain. Rashad, we got to take a quick pause. When we come back, folks, let's talk Colin Kaepernick. 5 years later, he got a look from an NFL team, the Las Vegas Raiders. Got to work out this week, and we will talk about the implications of that. Does that mean that folks will start to take a look at the NFL again? We're going to break it down for you and have that discussion. I'd love to hear your comments about it. Stay with us. It's The Culture on the Black Star Network.
Welcome you to the launch of the Mass Poor People's Low Wage Assembly and Moral March on Washington, D.C., June 18, 2022.
We are a new unsettling force, and we are powerful. A new unsettling force, and we are here.
We're rising up to demonstrate the compelling power that we, poor and low-income people, have to reconstruct society from the bottom up.
And we need to do it with the loudest voices possible, the biggest actions possible.
Because we know that there is no scarcity in this land. The only scarcity is the moral will to do what's right.
Hold on, just a little while longer.
We are those with sub-minimum wage jobs who can't afford sky-high rent.
People with disabilities are the fastest growing minority group.
It's crazy to me that in 2021, it's still legal for workplaces to pay a sub-minimum wage to people with disabilities.
There are still so much trial and tribulations that we go through as Indigenous people. We can't get a decent wage to sustain ourselves, nor can we get adequate housing.
Veterans across this nation say enough is enough. We can't pat essential workers on the back on one day and then cut their health care the next day.
Health is a political choice.
What more do I need to do to prove that my voice is just as valuable as anyone else's?
There are still forces in denial that would try to slow walk our transition to a clean economy and a just future for us all.
We have an immoral system run by immoral people.
But together we walk and we fight.
It's time for a change. Reconstruyamos esta gran nación.
See, we are people of resilience. As we fight these interlocking injustices together,
when we work together, mobilize together, and rise together, we become a voice for the voiceless, and we become an agent of change in a time where great change is needed.
We need the third reconstruction to ensure that deaf people, people with disabilities, and all people can have the right to live and to thrive.
We know what they are doing, but the question is, what are we going to do? Reconstruction begins when we change our mentality and say it's time for you to get your foot off of my neck.
Justice is coming soon.
Hey, do you believe that today?
Hi, I'm Dr. Jackie Hood Martin, and I have a question for you. Ever feel as if your life is teetering and the weight and pressure of the world is consistently on your shoulders? Well, let me tell you, living a balanced life isn't easy. Join me each Tuesday on Black Star Network for A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie. We'll laugh together, cry together, pull ourselves together, and cheer each other on. So join me for new shows each Tuesday on Black Star Network, A Balanced Life with Dr. Jackie.
All right, folks. Well, if you haven't heard, Colin Kaepernick is back in NFL news. Now, in what capacity? He's actually working out for a team. Yes, Colin Kaepernick, the man that has created a wave of resistance and his support for the movement against police brutality, who had taken a knee, a simple gesture of taking a knee, and has created an uproar around the country, causing him to be expelled from the NFL for the past 5 years, has finally got a chance to have a workout. Now, Colin has been saying in repeated conversations, interviews, and on social media that he has been working diligently day in and day out to keep himself up to par and ready for the opportunity. Well, he has completed a workout with the Las Vegas Raiders, and we don't know whether the Raiders will take him or not. But let me just share with you what the owner, Mr. Mark Davis, had to say about this. Let's post this quote, folks. Take a look at this. He said, "I believe in Colin Kaepernick." He told NBC Sports Bay Area last month, he said he deserves every chance in the world to become a quarterback in the NFL. I still stand by it. If our coaches and general manager want to bring him in or want him to be a quarterback on this team, I would welcome him with open arms. Now, for Mr. Davis, this isn't the first time that he has stood in support of Colin Kaepernick. He actually told ESPN back in 2020, folks, that if his coach or general manager wanted to take a look at the QB, he would be on board. And Mr. Mark Davis has maintained a close relationship with one of Colin Kaepernick's biggest advocates, University of Michigan football coach, head coach, Mr. Jim Harbaugh, who was also his coach when he played with the San Francisco 49ers, and who was also the coach that allowed him to use his Colin to come in for the spring to work out with his players at the University of Michigan about a month or so ago. Now, if you remember, Colin has been on a different comeback tour. Before, there was all of these stop starts. Well, over these past few weeks, Colin has been working in various venues across the country with wide receivers, both currently in the NFL and outside, and who have left the NFL, to show that he still got what it takes to be a starter, or as he said, to be a team player for the National Football League, if a team would take him and give him a chance. All right, so Rashad, I want to bring my big brother, my culture crew member Rashad, back into this. Now, here's the other thing, Rashad. Go ahead. What you got to say?
How long will it take? Like, let's just get rid of the political rhetoric and let's get down to the genesis of it. It's football. Do he have the skill set? Does he have the talent, the energy, the strength, the endurance, and the intellect as a QB to be the chief navigating the captain on that field? Once we get past that, all the political rhetoric and everything else is out the way.
Absolutely. And this is what Kaepernick said, which I think is the reason why he's getting a look. He didn't take this attitude before, but this is why I think he's getting a look now, Rashad. He told, he was on a podcast called I Am Athlete, and he said this last month on this podcast. He said, quote, "I know I have to find my way back in. So yeah, if I have to come in as a backup, that's fine. But that's not where I'm staying. And when I prove that I'm a starter, I want to be able to step on the field as such. I just need that opportunity to walk through the door." That's now. Let me just say this, because I've been watching this and following this whole scenario. That's a different Kaepernick than what I think we saw maybe about a year or so ago. You know what I mean? A year or so ago, he was like, "Y'all know where I am. Follow me." You know what I mean? I think there was a tryout. The NFL had set him up for another workout. Didn't happen. He wound up doing his own workout at a different place in Atlanta, at a high school, if I'm remembering correctly. But it was a different thing. It was a different attitude. He was like, nah, y'all come to me. Now the tune has changed to, I'm a team player. If I got to come in as a backup, so be it. But I love the fact is he's reminding her, I'm going to come in as a backup. But I'm going to work my ass off to become a starter. I love that. But I think, for me, I think that turned the tide for him. Like, you got to change your attitude. Look, it's been 5 years. All this other stuff has been happening. Social justice has been at the forefront of the American consciousness for the past 5 years. If you look at the owners and stuff, yeah, there's definitely, I believe, a conspiracy to keep him out. You know what I mean? Because they were afraid. But all it takes is just one. All it takes is just one. We're in a different place in this country. Not even on the, and to add to that, these NFL teams, they need a quarterback, man. Look, maybe because it's the way I think, though, Rashad. If I was an owner, I would have been like, let's get Colin back in here. Let's get Colin in here. You know why? Even if it's like, I don't totally agree with his stance, and I do, but if I was a person that didn't agree with his stance, he's going to sell out stadiums. His jersey will be number one. I mean, if y'all want to keep it like, I want to keep it a buck, he is going to be, if he gets this chance with the Raiders, brother, everybody and their grandmother about to become Raiders fans.
It's sellout seats, like you said. So we either play with the political one, we play with the numbers, or we play with the social fiber of this country, like you said from the last segment. We need to be vigilant in knowing when to count our wins. When he took this knee, it was to raise the consciousness and awareness and holding these larger institutions and agencies and organizations like the NFL accountable to be mindful of what is happening in society now. So even when we see the NBA in the playoffs and you have coaches saying, hey, why are we talking about the conclusion of this game when they have young people that are being killed in our schools? It was because of him having these conversations 5 years ago that we're still talking about Black Lives Matter. We're still having these conversations. Yeah, they're erasing our history and they're erasing the symbolism and artistic flow of our movement building, but it is still at the tip of our tongue. So if the fact that he was a martyr or a catalyst in raising the consciousness, and now he is able to get a second win of coming back and showing his worthiness and his skill set of what he has been assigned to, and not just a social activist, but also a professional athlete, and he has the capability and the skill set to do so, and he's awarded a position with his humility to say, hey, I'll take the backseat until I am worthy and show my worthy enough to be the starting one, then that is 2 wins that we can count in this brother sacrificing himself for the larger masses of our people in the diaspora. And I am proud to see that we have gotten to this space, and I just hope that this brother weighs everyone and blows everyone away and say, hey, we could have resolved this 5 years ago.
Hey, I agree. People are checking in, folks, and post your comments on our YouTube and our Facebook page. But people are checking in, and forensic accountant said Davis needs to rightfully so make up for the John Gruden fiasco. Yeah, I would. A forensic, I agree with you 100%. If they should have been, and I'm glad they were the first team, right? You know, they were the first team to be like to give Colin a workout. Now there were 2 other teams that also showed that they were interested in giving Colin a workout. So, but Vegas needed this one. They needed this one. I mean, how powerful would that be? You went from a racist coach, right? You went from a racist coach to now having on your roster one of the most socially progressive players in the league. I mean, think about the storyline behind it, how powerful that would be. And so, you know, that's powerful. I think Mark Davis understands that, the optics of that. He understands that. So I think that would be an executive. I think that was a great point. The other thing is, and Mike V said something I think that was important. Ariel, let's show Mike V's comment on this one as we talk about, we talked about George Floyd in the last segment, but I think this was an interesting point that Mike V made. He said, quote, not having Kaepernick at the White House for the signing of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act after all he's done was a disservice to the movement. It may have been. I don't think it was. I mean, there were a lot of people that should have been at the White House for the signing of that, right? Or even advocating for that. Not that it hasn't been put into place, but it's. I mean, look, we were all there. Like we all would have been a good look. We all stand in solidarity with police reform. But if Colin is trying to stay focused on his professional career, it may not have worked out. He's working in a very unique space, right? He's trying to get back into the NFL. He's still an athlete. He still wants to play football. He will have time to be the social justice advocate that we know and come to love. What's your take on that, Rashad?
Yeah, I say optic-wise, I think Mike had a great point. Optic-wise, that would have looked great for it, right? But the end goal is to get the act sign, not who's there to watch someone actually pick up the pen, but to make sure that the ink dries on the act itself, right? So back to what we always say, is it symbolic representation or is it some realistic change and progressionary change? But optic-wise, it would have been a great look. But if we get this act sign, that's the win that we are actually going for. So let's stay mindful of what we really want to have as our outcomes and our overarching goals.
I think it would just been optics, bro. I think that would just been optics because we already know where he's stand. You know what I'm saying? It's like he sacrificed 5 years outside of the league. He was at the peak of his career. He sacrificed that for his stand. So it was optic. But I appreciate that, Mike. Always a pleasure to hear what you got to say. Vic posted something that I thought was really cool. He said, as a San Francisco 49ers fan, it's crazy, but I would buy a Kaepernick Raiders jersey.
And that's
look,
on the culture.
And
that's on the culture.
I'm a Ravens fan. I'll buy a Kaepernick Raiders jersey. I mean, everybody will buy it.
and I'm wearing mine backwards like Nelly and crisscross, just so you know how I'm showing up.
Right.
I'm leading with the name and the number.
I would buy it. So I would love to see it. My thing is, he getting some real legitimate looks right now. My hope is he lands on a team, right? I'm not even picky. I think there was some discussion of him possibly going to Seattle with Pete Carroll and the Seahawks. I'm not being picky. I just want to see the brother on a team. Question is, Rashad, very quickly, do you think that will bring people back to looking at the NFL? Because I know there were a number of our people that were saying, hey, I'm not watching this because of how y'all treated Kaepernick. I don't necessarily agree with it because I think that, you still got more black people in it. I mean, we already know there are a lot of black players in the league, so they all need our support in some way, shape, or form. But do you think that that his comeback, if picked up by the Raiders, will bring people to look back at the NFL?
Yeah, I think that's an easy assumption. I think it will pick the ones that have taken the moral, obligation and sacrifice to say, hey, I won't turn to that channel because you won't get my viewership, which then raises your numbers and bring up your revenue. But since you have been taking a stance of acceptance to what this man's space was in this social movement of raising awareness and consciousness, and you allow him back where he still can show up in his full and doesn't have to compromise his integrity and what he's have put on the line for the last 5 to 6 years, yeah, I'll be willing to go back and look at it myself, even if I only just watch his games, just to root him on, just to say, hey, since you brought him back on, I'm going to give my viewership and my money to him. I'm going to purchase a jersey for him because we know as a culture, we are often the ones that are giving more monetarily to things that don't benefit us as a collective, that if we say, hey, we're rallying behind this man and I'm going to put my money behind this man, and not even the whole organization of what the NFL has done or has not done, I think some of us will be, and I'll be one of those one that'll jump back on that bandwagon. I can morally say that because I understand and I respect his moral obligations and what he has done as a righteous social activist and a professional athlete. That once he's back into his arena where he's been birthed to play at his optimal level, I'm be willing to support this brother.
Yeah, bro. Yeah. One of our other watchers who I want to get, Chris V, he said, I think too much time has passed to get the majority of black fans boycotting the NFL to get them watching regularly again. I think that might be the case, Chris. I think that might be the case. But I will say, if this happens, even as Colin is a backup player, let me tell y'all something. Football is going to go bananas this year. He's going to play, even if he's a backup, they're going to probably have him playing for the preseason. If he's not starting for the Raiders and he's a backup, he's going to play in some preseason games. And man, if something were to happen to that starter, I don't even know who that starter is, would possibly be this year. But if something were to happen to that starter and Colin steps in, it's game over. You're going to see. Remember the year when Mike Vick came back? Remember that when he played when he was playing for the Eagles? He started lightening up the whole spot, bro. Like he started, even for that year, for that 1 year, he started lightening up everything. I think
training camps, preseasons, everything was already sold out.
Story, and this is the exciting part. This will be a comeback story for the ages. That Colin Kaepernick was back after 5 years out of the league. Trust and believe, folks are going to tune in. Hey,
Farajii, quick question with that.
What'd you
Quick
say?
question. If we see this, would this be the first time in now social movement history of seeing an athlete that sacrificed their work, their wealth, their talent for the progression of people to come back to their same arena of sports? Because did we see Muhammad come back? Did we see the other brothers that threw up the fist during the Olympics? Have we seen anyone else that stepped away and to return back after they have taken this moral stance? And what does that say to us? And what did that say to the progression of this country to admit faults and to say we can do better?
Yep, absolutely. Rashad, I appreciate you, brother. Keep doing the great work that you're doing. And we look forward to chatting with you next week, God willing. And thank you so much, Rashad, for being so good for the culture, brother.
Hey, always for the culture, brother. Thank you. Thank you for being with us. Peace.
Absolutely. All right, family, that's going to do it for me. I thank each and every one of you for tuning in. Look, make sure y'all continue to show support for Black Star Network, blackstarnetwork.com, and support Black-owned media. We're having the conversations at the important times like no one else. And that is why you should tune into to us each and every day. Support us financially. Support us with your shares. Support us with your downloads of Black Star Network. But this is where you get unfiltered, unapologetic media for Black people in a way that encourages us to think, in a way that encourages us to take action, and most importantly, in a way that is so good for the culture. So make sure you support the Black Star Network at blackstarnetwork.com. And again, folks, I would highly recommend check out what Brother Roland did yesterday as he spoke to families of police brutality right there on the great Black Lives Matter Plaza right in Washington, D.C., outside having the conversation about George Floyd 2 years later. Powerful, powerful broadcast that was done yesterday in commemoration of the 2 years since the death of our brother George Floyd. Check that out. That's streaming right now. You can find it on blackstarnetwork.com, and you can see what was said, what was discussed, and most importantly, what are the next steps in this movement for police reform and respect, and changing the conversation and changing the relationship between Black people and the police. Very, very, very powerful discussion. And again, that can be found at blackstarnetwork.com. All right, stay tuned at 6 o'clock. Brother Roland checks back in with Roland Martin Unfiltered. You can tune into him at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And as always, for me, never be afraid to challenge what's wrong, stand for what's right while being yourself in the process. God willing, we'll talk tomorrow for another exciting conversation right here on The Culture, only if found exclusively on the Black Star Network. Peace.